My name is Emma Lawrence and I'm a Senior Higher Education Consultant at DVE here at DVE, and I'll be facilitating today's session. This session is being recorded and will be available on our website after the webinar. I'd like to begin today by acknowledging that I'm facilitating this webinar from the lands of the Kaurna people in South Australia. I acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands from those joining us around the country and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. I would also like to extend our respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people joining the webinar today. I'm delighted to welcome you all to our first Fireside Chat in 2024. Today's webinar focuses on the Accord, WIL and employment and is a follow-up session to last year's Can Work Integrated Learning Meet Australia's Future Workforce Needs. If you missed that webinar, it is available on our DVE website. During today's webinar, we will focus on the Accord Final Report findings and recommendations as they apply to WIL and in particular placements. A little bit about DVE. We're a consultancy who've been providing business solutions for over 15 years in the higher education sector. We've worked with over 36 Australian universities and numerous TAFEs, RTOs and private providers to deliver hundreds of projects across our business lines: governance and compliance, organisational improvement and digital transformation. We work across all aspects of the education lifecycle, whether it's through initial or re-registration and accreditation, process improvement, student experience, change, communications and systems implementation. I'm delighted that Professor Ruth Bridgestock is again joining us for this second instalment on WIL. Ruth has more than 15 years academic leadership experience and is an internationally recognised researcher in graduate employability, education for the future life and work, and authentic curriculum and pedagogy. She is currently the Director Employability at Swinburne University and is a Principal Fellow of the Higher Education Academy, TEX Expert, AAUT Award winner and Australian National Senior Teaching Fellow for Graduate Employability 2.0. Professor Shelley Kinash is an executive leader with over 30 years' experience in tertiary education. Her substantive position is as Universal Higher Education's Chief Academic Officer. In addition, she is Chair Academic Board for two other private tertiary education providers, enabling benchmarking and cross-fertilisation. Her ongoing research is practice-based, deriving impact on student voice and equity and graduate career outcomes. She is a Principal Fellow of the Higher Education Academy and a faculty member of the Australasian Council on Open and Digital Education's Learning Technologies Leadership Institute. As a teaching academic, she facilitated student learning in educational technology, inclusive education, teacher preparation, and community rehabilitation and disability studies. As an executive leader across 3 Australian universities, she's led institution-wide quality learning and teaching and student experience. This 360 approach to her career journey enables Professor Kinash to lead joined-up and collaboration and communities of practice, facilitating high-quality experiences and outcomes for students, graduates, staff and communities. And I welcome both Ruth and Shelley to this session today. To start with, I'd like to get both of your thoughts on the final Accord and in particularly WIL in the Accord. Is it a game changer and does it go far enough? Ruth, let's start with you.
Okay, thanks, Emma. And I will also acknowledge the traditional owners of the various lands that we're meeting on today and pay my respects to their elders past and present. Okay, the final Accord, WIL in the Accord, and is it a game changer? Does it go far enough? Okay, so for me, the student-related aspects of the Accord are fundamentally about equity and widening participation. And increasing tertiary attainment very significantly as a way of driving economic and social development and environmental sustainability. So it's basically skills through equity is the core agenda. So, I mean, this is certainly a game changer in terms of how universities engage with their students, because it places responsibility for supporting and engaging students on the institutions. And the Accord, of course, engages with WIL in these terms. So, you know, how do we address inequity brought about by placement poverty, students not being able to complete their degrees because they can't afford to go on prac and so on? How do we support all students to access WIL and employment? These kinds of questions. Do I think it goes far enough in terms of WIL? I think it's a good start. It's heading in the right direction in many respects. but I don't think it really unpacks many of the equity issues faced by students who are seeking to develop their career readiness, let alone suggesting solutions for those. So, for instance, students who face barriers to WIL and employment because they live with a disability or are living in a regional area. What's the positional support for regional students? Some of this is a little fuzzy. For me, the support for students policy piece that they're leading with could have called out support for career readiness and work experience more explicitly. So we are appropriately engaging with it in terms of transition in, student engagement, retention, and what about transition out, career experiences and outcomes? Also, a broader question from me is the Accord is really about the supply side of economic development, so skills through equity, and using higher and vocational education as a driver for that. But I'm not 100% clear on whether it links sufficiently with the demand side. So that is having a fertile, supportive kind of labour market for all those students to emerge into. There's a broad federal government white paper on jobs and opportunities released in September last year. But how do we join that up with what it's trying to do with the Accord to ensure meaningful and productive pathways for our many students who are going to be wanting to engage with work post university experiences?
Emma, your thoughts?
Thank you. Ruth did a beautiful job of summarizing the key themes of Accord, and I absolutely agree. I think the devil's going to be in the detail, and where, to use another trite saying, where the rubber meets the road, is it actually going to bring about the differences that we want to see and the change that we need to see because of the evolution of the game is changing. Who are our students? What are their outcomes? What is the positioning, the ontology of higher education and tertiary education? So in some regards, I'm optimistic. We look already, there's been three actions, three outcomes that we're seeing. The first was immediately after the final report of the Accord was published, we saw the change for the job ready graduates, the JRG, and the stick was against the students. If you failed 50% of your units, subjects, courses, whatever you want to call them, after you attempted 50%, you were out because you lost your Commonwealth funding, and that really meant that students discontinued their education. So the stick was against the student. Now the stick has been sent to providers so that we all have to prove that we have bent over backwards to support our students' success. What have we done in terms of intervention plans, et cetera, when students are struggling? Otherwise, there's a fine of over $20,000 per student if we can't show that we've supported them. So that was an immediate and really exciting change. Two more changes have just been announced, and we're going to dig into these as we continue in this conversation. One are placement payments in high skill-based occupations where we really need people. And the second is HECS indexation. So changing the paybacks on student loans. But here's where there's trouble arising, and we're going to talk about this more. I have changed from public universities to private provider, and from primarily domestic students to supporting primarily international students. And guess what? International students, most international students do not qualify for these benefits. And they already have, there's a steep, unlevel playing field. They already pay way more for their education, et cetera. So I think there's a lot of equity details to work through, making sure that the benefits that we want to see of the Accord and the global human capital development that we're looking to see can really take place, and that we are achieving the mission. So one of the very first statements in the Accord is that the way to bring about the skill-based economy, what our world needs as we move into more Gen AI, cybersecurity issues, et etc., is that we bring more equity groups up and that we level that playing field and make sure that disadvantaged people, that we're widening participation and widening outcomes. But are we actually going to be able to do that?
Thank you. They're really good points, both of you. And I just quickly, Ruth, you mentioned about, do you think that the current employment climate, which is clearly a bit unstable at the moment, is actually ready to absorb a whole lot of paid placements?
Well, I know that providers are struggling, even with unpaid placements at this point. We've come off the back of quite a significant contraction of the economy, and then followed by some rapid rebounding, some reasonably significant inflation, and we're facing cost of living sorts of issues. Things are going up and down. I think that the Accord, like the skills and jobs position of the federal government, they're sort of medium-term kinds of pieces, and it becomes about broader economic development, and it becomes about having a broader kind of position on sort of a fertile outcome for students rather than specifics. I think short term, this might be a little problematic.
A rocky road, perhaps.
Yeah.
So the next question is it WIL or is it employment? So does paying or subsidising students for placements, and the Accord implies that this will be for all work integrated learning in the future, does it create a fundamental shift in the idea of work integrated learning? Shelley, perhaps you could start on that one.
Excellent. Things are becoming blurred, and that's a good thing. So we can't have these tight operational definitions and expect things to fit neatly into tight boxes. Our students have changed. It really was, when you look back into who was going into university education in the past, there was a lot more uniformity in terms of the profile of students who you saw. You know, they tended to be male. They tended to be those who had the highest grades in their high school education. They tended to be 17, 18-year-old school leavers who were going, et cetera, et cetera. That's not the case anymore. The diversity has really expanded, and the purpose that people go to university has widely expanded. And now we tend to see many more people who have already joined the workforce and have set their career goals before they go to university or go to tertiary education more generally. They're a lot more mature age students who have specific goals and are coming in later. So we need to be more personalized and bespoke in the types of opportunities that we're offering. So multiple means of, and I'm a big fan that we not only have work integrated learning, which means that the primary environment of the student is the university campus, and they step out for periods of time and join the workforce and reflect on that and bring them back into their primary environment of the education institution, towards a move towards more learning integrated work, where we're bringing the education into the work environments where they're already spending most of their time and have their primary ownership and identity, and bringing the education into that environment, and then lots of modes and models in between. So I think that we need to be more personalized, bespoke, and work with our students and see, what are your career goals? Have you already already entered the workforce and you're going for, an acceleration, a progression of your degree, a raise, a promotion. And so what do you need for your education in order to get there? Or is it not about the workforce at all for you right now? And is it about, being a learned person, etc.? So we really need to find out what are the goals, the ambitions of our students, and carve out the types of opportunities that will allow them to meet their goals.
Ruth, your thoughts?
Like Shelley, I think that the ways, the models of learning in relation to authentic and situated contexts is changing, and I think that's broadly a really positive thing. As the world of work is changing, as our learners' needs are changing, so too are our modes of pedagogy and our course structures and so on. So yes, I think broadly that's a positive thing. I think the question is actually, it's about paying students for placements, isn't it? And the question is, does it create a fundamental shift in the idea of WIL to pay a student to engage? I think in terms of that, it won't create a fundamental shift. And also that in terms of work integrated learning, and here I'm talking about students who are learning primarily in a classroom or in inside a campus environment, going out to experience, to integrate work and so on, to come back, it should not create a fundamental shift to that particular model. And the reason is that WIL, in that model, it's about student learning first. The student's there to gain valuable experiences, knowledge and skills. The value that they bring to the employer can be important, but when you think about it, some models of WIL, it's not so much about that. It's about the student comes in and has a study tour. They do some work shadowing. That all counts too. So depending on the model of WIL, the value that they bring to the employer can be important. But if we start thinking of WIL primarily as an employment relationship rather than a learning relationship, its value as a way of integrating learning can start to erode. It doesn't need to, but it can. So the beauty of well-constructed WIL, in whatever mode you have, is that the experiences and the tasks and the supervision, they're all agreed well between the different parties. So between the employer, the community partner, the institution, the supervisor, and the student, and it becomes a win-win-win. So the student receives payment to support them to be able to engage in that learning experience rather than payment for specific tasks. So if we start going into payment for specific tasks, that perhaps starts to move us into a direction of this student is an employee, and that then changes the learning relationship. Now, I'm not saying that that relationship doesn't work necessarily, but it does mean that the curriculum is determined differently. So there's things that we need to think about very carefully around, is this payment for work, or is this a scholarship or a subsidy to support students while they learn? And they may well add value in those work environments while they're there. Or is it a combination of both? I think any of the above, but we need to think about it explicitly and then be really clear so that we can agree between the parties.
This is for both of you, and it's a question without notice that's come out of what you said. So do you think then if WIL is not employment, but at the moment universities don't, on the whole, and I forgive anyone who's watching this who says, well, no, that's not the right way of doing it this way, is the recognition of either a student's past employment or current employment. How will that mesh into paid placements, for example? So is it worth universities considering students who may be nursing students who are working in aged care, for example, that actually is still work integrated learning, even though they've got that job off their own bat? Would there be a shift in the sort of thought about students' life outside university and how it then impacts their learning?
Yeah, there might well be. So at the moment, there's the Fair Work Act, and some interesting stipulations around what students can undertake as part of a vocational placement. At my institution and others that I know of, the policy is that a student cannot gain credit for an existing employment relationship. They can do a work integrated learning experience with the same employer, but it needs to be a separate piece of learning, and it needs to be agreed explicitly in terms of the outcomes and so on and so forth. So that's about the primacy of the learning experience. And when we start to recognise paid work as being a work integrated learning experience, that relationship starts to muddy. That said, I mean, more broadly, I would say that there is absolutely really important value in students undertaking learning value in students undertaking paid work. Whether that's separately or that's supported by the institution in some kind of way. And we want to be able to recognise the value of that. So there's some interesting tensions in there to kind of to unpack going forward. Shelley, what do you reckon?
So I agree with you. I'd like to add three elements that I've heard you talk about before to highlight. One is RPL, recognition of prior learning. And I think that with the primacy of learning, as you've said, that sometimes that learning can come out of skill-based work that we're doing as well. So that if we're taking a personalized approach to RPL, to recognition of prior learning, that we can incorporate the learning that students have from the workplaces into their learning of conceptual curricular material as well. The second concept to bring in is challenge exams. And I think that this is an area that we haven't spent enough time on yet. And if the Office for Learning and Teaching still existed, I think this would be a really meaty project for someone to do, to look at, challenging exams for credit that they have achieved particular areas through whatever means, including work. And the third area is micro-credentialing and modularization. So there's really exciting developments in micro-credentialing. And so if you bring in, again, this is an example of learning integrated work, if you brought in those online micro-credential units, it could bring about that primacy of learning into the workplace so that it brings it all together for the students to reflect on that learning that they're achieving in the workplace, but bring in that key curricular content and theoretic content that they need.
Thank you for that. Ruth, on the weekend, the government announced the subsidy amount of $319.50 odd cents per week up to, it is means tested, for nursing, teaching, midwifery and social work students and placements. Is this enough to make an impact on placement poverty, given the cost of living at the moment?
Here's the very topical $1,000 question. Oh no, it's $319.50. Yes, right. I think a lot of us looked at this development with great interest over the weekend. So prior to this, I'd kind of been looking at it and saying, okay, well, we agree that students need some sort of financial support in many cases in order to engage with the hundreds of hours that they need to do in order to achieve their professionally accredited degree. But where's it going to come from? And then Jason Clare started to answer this. I think, yes, it will make an impact. I think, yes, it's a good start. I mean, I think the government is really signalling its commitment to the accord here. by contributing financially in an area where they can see it's needed. It's a great sign. Is it enough to address financial pressures sufficiently to make a difference to students? I think some students, but probably not all students. Doesn't ease the burden at all for OT or speech therapy students who also have to do hundreds of hours of placements, for instance, or students who are in non-professionally accredited courses and are doing WIL. But I think, I mean, it's promising. Now we're all looking at it. There's an appetite to improve the situation, and it's going to adjust and improve over time. I mean, I think the government has signalled that this is an initial step. This is a way in. And we will continue to develop over time to better meet the needs of students, to support them to do that important learning.
Thank you. And following on from that, do you think that in particular for equity groups, will this amount be enough to make a difference? And we know that equity groups often suffer greater poverty placement than others. And then as a sort of secondary part to that question, will it create inequality for equity group students who are not enrolled in those particular degree programs?
Yeah. So I think it'll be quite uneven to begin with. It'll be inequitable for some. But it's heading in the right direction. Is my take on it. I mean, I know that there is really good research going on right now to characterise and explore the impact of placement poverty on students with different backgrounds, different profiles, and engaging in different kinds of courses. And what levels and types of financial support will be most effective to support students to get through the learning experience. And I'm hopeful, and I'm reasonably optimistic that the government is going to use this data to inform the support that's provided going down the track. As I say, this is our first foray into this. I'm reasonably certain that the Department of Education was sitting around scratching their heads a few weeks ago going, right, how are we going to do this? And it's the first foray. So let us as a sector support the government to continue to make good decisions and to hone their decisions and support over time by informing them around what's going on for and with our students using an evidence-informed approach.
Prepared to listen?
Yeah, I think they are.
That's the Accord. The Accord's opened that door?
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, that's good to know. That's really good to know. Often the case is that in a lot of these things, in my experience over the years I've worked in higher education, is that there's a lot of goodwill and good thought about some of these schemes or implementations, but they never quite live up to the expectations of them.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the Accord final report makes some really very ambitious statements about what we need to be doing. And as Shelley says, the devil is in the detail. It's about the operationalization of those things. But I think, I mean, I'm really heartened by the fact that there's been really open consultation through the Accord process multiple times. The government is listening to the Accord outcomes, and there's also a public commitment to adjust and improve over time. So, yeah.
I think that gives me an avenue to jump in, if that's all right, Emma. I think that as long as this is first steps, so we've defined a very tight area. So there's 3 disciplines that are really important disciplines for particular groups of students who are going to get the benefit of this particular initiative. So as long as this is a pilot, a first step, and we're able to scale it up, because at this point, this is problematic. And there is a 2-tiered system. And I'll give you 2 examples. One came, I was just skimming through the Q&A chat box while you were speaking, Ruth, and there were some comments about what about employers who are in SMEs, so small and medium-sized enterprise, small family businesses who can't afford to pay, and if they're not eligible for the benefits from, because they're not the right industries, etc., for the benefits from the employers, and now students are going to expect to be paid and they can't afford to pay. Another problem is international students. So international students don't qualify for this benefit. Let's look at international students. We've invited them here. It was our third highest export industry. It's slipped to fourth highest. It's slipping to fifth highest. But still, it's something that Australia has made a commitment to global citizenship and international education. Right now, international students pay 3 to 4 to 5 times the cost of the fees. They don't get HECS access. Most often, there's no bank of mom and dad to rely on. They often need to send money home to their country of origin to support their extended families. They need to work more than part-time, in my experience. There's accommodation stigma. I know that there's a lot of thought that the reason that we have accommodation problems is because we have too many international students, but I'll tell you, working with a lot of international students, they're not getting accommodations. They're not getting selected for that rent. They have other barriers. They're less likely to be given competitive placements. There's often English language barriers, non-English speaking backgrounds. They're less likely to be hired. There's visa restrictions. So it worries me that unless we tackle this particular element of equity, that we are looking at, we're breaching that ground of that cash cow mentality.
It creates a two-tier system. So it is and rightly or wrongly, they've linked the payments to Austudy. So it is very, very clearly only for domestic students, and then only domestic students who meet a particular means test. I'm like you, Shelley, have worked with international students for a long time. And, I remember the battles at the University of Newcastle to get international students subsidised transport on the public transport system. So it does seem that this is a bit of a minefield and that they haven't clearly thought it through. So how would universities, or how would you both approach that then? If you had about 10 minutes with Jason Clare, what would you say to him about that?
So I think that we have to make a commitment, and if we're somewhere we've found money through for these initiatives, that we also have to open up a specified pocket of money for international students so that they have an equitable opportunity.
What would you say to?
I agree, Shelley. I think that this financial support needs to be distributed to the students who need it, irrespective of what scheme they come in under. We've accepted them. We're supporting them through the learning experience in order to engage in the learning experience in a meaningful kind of way. Work integrated learning is key for their work and professional readiness. Therefore, we need to allocate financial support on the basis of student need. So that includes international students, it includes domestic students, it includes students who are in non-accredited programs who may need to go on field work and therefore have to stop work temporarily. It includes the film students who have to go on set and they're there for 14 hours a day for 3 weeks, and then that's it for the placement. We need to accommodate all of the different student needs if we're really going to commit to addressing placement poverty.
Would it be easier if it was just a flat rate for everybody it was by degree rather than by student? Or is it another can of worms?
I think that's inconsistent with the Accord.
Yeah.
Because you look at the Accord and the very first principle is skills-based through equity, the first principle that's outlined in the Accord. And it says if we're ever to get to the education targets that Australia commits to, not only for Australian citizens, but for global human capital, that means we need to take an equity-based perspective. And equity doesn't mean equal for all, which we all know it means. I love the images where you see like the Lego approach or the building block approach. You give people more blocks when they're shorter to bring them up to the same height. So you give people what they need. You also look at, when I very first started talking, one of the examples I gave is the very quick move. The first action in response to the final report of the Accord was to remove the stick against the student and give the stick to the university instead of the job-ready graduates, 50% completion, you're out, or to saying, hey, universities now have a responsibility to prove their support to students who need the support. So that's the principle, and I agree with that principle that we have adopted through the Universities Accord. So if we're going to take that principle, I completely agree with Ruth that it needs to be needs-based. If students need something in order to achieve that same level and get the same outcomes as other students who don't have those needs, then we need to fulfill those needs.
Thank you. So, Shelley, do you think there are other ways that universities and higher education providers could reduce the impact of placement poverty?
So yes, a few ideas is clustering the student experience. So this is something that we do with my private provider because we have recognized placement poverty, study poverty. So we cluster our classes. We have an on-campus model. It's fully active learning participatory. So we have our students come 2 to 3 full days per week so that they can work in paid employment the other days. And this works really well for our particular cohorts of students. The other element is learning integrated work. Again, as Ruth said, we have to tread carefully because of Fair Work Act, but I think that we need to continue to explore reasonable ways of crediting students as placements for paid employment they are already undertaking with the primacy of learning, etc. That they'd need supervision, assessment, quality review, and appropriate scholarship. And finally, also that we continue the paid clinic idea. So this has worked well in disciplines and industries like law, psych, counseling, that students are paid for their work that they're doing. So an industry, kind of a startup model that's run through the universities where students are paid for their work while they're getting that learning experience. So those are 3 ideas that help students with that financial burden, because we know with student experience, students are only going to be successful if we not only take care of studies, but we also help them with the 360 life factors of family, work, finances. So it's Maslow's hierarchy of needs. If you don't have food, shelter, safety, belongingness, you're not going to be able to succeed in your studies.
Great response. Thank you for that. Sorry, I've just lost my questions. Ruth, does industry contributing to paid placements, and this is in the future in terms of the Accord, it's not this first sort of tranche or outcomes, does industry contributing to paid placements lead to the expectations of a greater say in skills development at universities, and is that a bad thing?
Yeah, so as Emma has just said, at the moment, there is no stipulation that industry would contribute to paid placements. This is something that's got to be carefully thought through, having regard to the needs of industry as well as students and higher education providers. I'm very sympathetic to the micro businesses and the small to medium enterprises who are going, how are we going to deal with this? But yeah, I mean, the question about a greater say in skills development at university is a really interesting one. So I actually think that closer relationships between universities and industry and community for learning are potentially a really positive thing for everyone. I don't think it works for industry to give universities a laundry list of skills and then say, you know, can you translate that into work-ready graduates at the end? I don't think anybody actually really thinks that that would work, but it's something that's been done in the past quite significantly. We quickly discover that teamwork means different things to different people in different contexts. And so it all sort of breaks down. But if we can really open up a meaningful, ongoing, open dialogue about what are the most meaningful and valuable learning outcomes and experiences, and partner with, between, and among in order to have those experiences, that's got to be a positive thing, right? So community and industry representatives come in to share their experiences, perspectives, to facilitate. Higher education representatives go into workplaces to facilitate, to encourage innovation. Students move between and among. It becomes a much more porous sort of system. And we improve and elevate the experience for all. And surely that's got to be a good thing. But another thought is that a university curriculum can't be driven purely by industry. And I think that that nobody is really suggesting that it should be, but I want to make that explicit. Because industry skill needs are part of the equation. They're an important part. Many students come to uni because they want to have the skills to plug into a career role at the end, understandably. But uni, and by this I mean higher education and also vocational education and training, it's about a deeper set of developmental experiences, connections with others, personal, social identity, metacognitive skills, citizenship, and so on and so forth, that we really need to be mindful of. So industry has some great perspectives and really valuable stuff to bring to the table, and so do other stakeholders. Also, in the light of ongoing disruptive changes in society, technology, and the world of work, ideally, we'd be looking around and ahead continually to update our curriculum and learning experiences to remain current. I mean, so this speaks to the value of research input and sort of futuring processes into curriculum and learning experiences. So maybe we can make this a really fruitful, productive learning experience for all partners involved. This is my utopia. Thank you for letting me share it with you.
That's all right. I totally agree.
Can I come?
Yeah, absolutely. We can all join.
Excellent.
I think there's a lot of cases. I mean, my experience, I've been, a conversation with a person I had a while ago, who ran an engineering firm, and just said that the university grad students he has just have none of that valid skills that he needed at that particular point in time. And because curriculum is so slow to change, maybe having more input from employers into curriculum means that in at least one small aspect, universities cannot be the slow behemoth that they are and go, we need to pivot skills a bit faster than we do.
I have to say that's a really exciting part about working for private providers. Talking about utopia, it really has been the magnitude of change and the rapidity of change is just dramatic. So we're able to accommodate the. I'm really impressed, for instance, with our new approach to generative AI in the aspect of academic integrity and our academic integrity policy. And we've been able to just shifted and so quickly and effectively so in this instance, actually, we're taking so we're calling it our AI cubed. So we're looking at academic integrity mixed with generative AI, artificial intelligence, and advancing industry. Because what we recognize is industry is using Gen AI. So for providers to say, thou shalt not use Chat GPT is just foolish, because industry uses Chat GPT. So we need our students so this is a perfect example of what we were just talking about. They need that skill to be work ready, but not only to be work ready, but to lead industry forward. So our students need to be able to be ahead of the game in elements such as artificial intelligence. So this is, again, staying to workplace skills, whether they're what's needed now to be work ready or to lead it forward. But then I take it a step even further, like Ruth said, that not all higher education or tertiary education is about a specific occupation. It is about being learned and mind expansive, and scholarship, and debate, and connections, and everything else. So we do need to have this model where we're looking at learning in a more holistic way, including skill-based agendas.
Thank you. My next question is for both of you. The Accord final report recommends WIL-related models like degree apprenticeships, and I do note that there is one university in Australia that launched, I think, just last week, the first degree apprenticeship. Do you think this is a fruitful direction, and if so, how would they work?
So I'll just jump in quickly with a very quick response. I love it because I think it's a very synergistic model, and I think I am very pleased to see that Sally Kift is with us here in the participants. So looking at the work that Sally Kift and Karen Nelson and others did about transition pedagogy, this is a perfect example of that. It's a wonderful way. I think that we've gotten a lot better at transition in and somewhat into transition through in the first year experience, and supporting students through belongingness, etc., to continue with education. We're still not very good at transition out and transition through the career workplace. So this model that you've just talked about degree apprenticeships, is a beautiful model of transition from higher education or tertiary education into the workforce and through that transition through careers.
Your thoughts on them?
There are a few things kicking around in the sector at the moment that refer to themselves as degree of apprenticeships. There's different kinds of models of a paid work apprenticeship offered in parallel or in some way integrated with vocational and higher education qualifications, often with wraparound mentoring and so on. One example that I'm reasonably familiar with is at Swinburne, we have the Cybersecurity Academy. It offers a diploma in IT, a Bachelor of Cybersecurity in 3 years, with a part-time apprenticeship at Deloitte as well. So with that kind of model, I mean, I think it's potentially a fruitful direction to go in. So in theory, the student goes on an enriching learning journey. They acquire practical and theoretical skills and experiences. They've got a great pathway into a career. The industry partner ends up with the all-important pipeline of talent that they talk to me about all the time, that they can then grow and shape. We start being able to draw upon offerings from vet and higher education in meaningful ways that are actually about the learning outcomes for the student and their particular trajectory, rather than saying, okay, wait, no, that's AQF 5, this sort of thing. And we start to break down the silos between sectors, which is, I think, of absolute paramount importance. But we're just starting to learn how to do these different kinds of models. And with these sorts of teething problems that we're experiencing at the moment, I mean, In my experience of them, they're sort of a bit hard to administer. We've got silos between vet and HE and sort of conversations about, hang on, well, I'm governed by this and you're governed by this, and then how do we make this work together? There's a lot of brokerage, negotiation, relationship building between at least 4 partners that I can think of in this sort of relationship. Vet, higher education, industry partner, student. It's pretty resource intensive. It's legally confusing. Current models are not overly scalable. But I mean, that's the practicality of the thing. And I don't think that that means that we should shy away from exploring these sorts of models, which are potentially, really enriching for all and valuable. I think that we should keep exploring. I think that we should think in terms of the learning needs of the student. I think that we should think about where the student is going to end up. Think about the skills, the capabilities, the experiences that they require, and then backwards map and create experiences and curate experiences, join those up for and with students and with industry and community partners, so that they give us the outcomes that we really want.
I was talking to an academic from Nottingham Trent in the UK earlier this week, and the UK model has got quite a number of degree apprenticeships within it. And she said, and I found this quite interesting, is that it opens higher education to a whole lot of people that had never considered higher education before. So I think that's something that perhaps we need to keep in mind, that we may be presented with more equity groups, but it is a great way for people who would never normally consider tertiary education or higher education, university education, that it's an approachable way for them to come into the sector.
And that fits with the Accord as well. Another key theme is that partnership and integration, joined up approach between all providers, VOC providers. So looking at a more holistic and expansive and personalized mode of tertiary education.
I think we've got time for one more question, and then final thoughts and comments. So for both of you, the big takeout from the final Accord report is a concept of the National Jobs Brokerage System, which will facilitate student will and work opportunities. And the implication is that it will be delivered through a provider that charges subscriptions to employers. What are your thoughts on this recommendation? Is it useful and feasible?
So quickly, I worked back in Canada. We had a model called Hire a Student, and it was a brilliant initiative. And so that's what I did in my summers while I was at university, ran a local Hire a Student office. And we used to have the placements that, the jobs that were called in by the employers, and then we would meet with the students and match them up. And it was a beautiful model. And I keep thinking, what happened to that model? I think that we need something like that again, and we don't need it to be overly complicated. I think we can go back to a simple hire a student model that's both for placements and employment opportunities, part-time, full-time, and graduate opportunities.
Yeah, so like Shelley, I mean, my thinking initially went to, jobs on campus, students at work kinds of models. And I think there's a few institutions around Australia that offer that kind of sort of part-time work at the institution while you're studying sort of approach, with different sorts of levels of support and development. I think jobs brokerage, broadly speaking, happens inside most institutions in different kinds of ways. I mean, we've all got jobs boards. Some of us have talent models, so putting students in contact with employers, including the institution as an employer, so the jobs on campus or hire a student thing. Active matching of WIL opportunities, varying levels of support. Some have actual recruitment functions sitting inside them. The business models of these are nearly always, I note, not based on charging the employer. Sometimes they are, but by and large, they're not. Yeah, so I can think of a couple of exceptions. So, I mean, I think from my take on it, what we'd be looking at is an external provider who charges employers to access students and graduates and that talent. Now, I love the idea of improving student pathways into work through any of a variety of means, if that's part-time work, if that's jobs on campus, if that's work integrated learning, matching opportunities, if that's graduate or launch kinds of experiences, and addressing the barriers through brokerage and active support and engagement. I think that's fab. What I'm less clear on here is whether employers would pay to participate in such a scheme at scale. Except for, the top student talent kinds of things, or, we need 50 students to come and work with us on X, Y, Z. But that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about a real scaled kind of experience. And I think that that's going to take quite a mindset shift on the part of industry. And also, again, we come back to the consideration of those SMEs, those not-for-profits, the micro businesses who are there saying, oh dear, we're in the cold again. So I think we need to think very carefully through, yes, we agree that this is a really important thing to do to support students and really ease the barriers and help with their engagement with work and work-like experiences. But how exactly is it going to work, and who is going to pay for it? That's always the question, isn't it?
It's not already the job of the careers services at universities?
Yeah, we do a lot of this stuff. Yeah.
So that's been my biggest question about it, is that there are systems already in place that do this, that don't cost either the student or a potential employer any money.
Yes. So the challenge that we now have is, if we have many thousands more students coming through, and the Accord is signalling active jobs brokerage, so matching of students, maybe we can get generative AI to help in different sorts of ways, which sort of parallels the recruitment processes. How does that look at scale? How can we make that work? Does this third-party provider with subscription, does that work? It looks as though it might not, but maybe people have had further thoughts than I have in this space.
I realised that we are literally about to run out of time, so I probably don't even have for much time for summation. If you could sum up the Accord in a couple of words, or the WIL and Accord in a couple of words, it may be too difficult. Shelley, let's start with you. A good thing or a bad thing?
So, okay, I see. Yes, I think it's a wonderful thing. And to quote Sally Gift again, needed now. And I really, as Ruth said earlier, with Mary's leadership of this, it's highly consultative. There's been a loud and strong and diverse voice in it. I think that we don't want to throw out the baby with the bathwater. We want to scale up. So just because initiatives don't meet everybody's needs, they're never going to. We need to celebrate the first steps and say, yes, yay, this is exciting. Let's build on this and grow it more expansive.
And Ruth, your final couple of words?
I think the Accord is moving in an important new direction for us, and we're working out what it all means very rapidly. In our excitement and our important work that we're doing, engaging with students, providing them with the support that they need to make the most of the learning experiences while they're at the institution. Let's make sure that we're not forgetting the fact that they will transition into life beyond the world of work. They'll stay connected with us, but how do we support a much wider, more diverse, body of students and graduates with their ongoing learning needs. It's a really, really exciting time. So let's push ahead. Let's take an evidence-informed approach. And I'm pretty certain that the government is listening. So we have ways forward.
Excellent. Look, I'd like to thank you both so much for your insights into this really interesting topic. And I'd also like to thank all of our participants. This recording will be available in a few days' time on the DVE website if you want to go back to it. But again, Ruth and Shelley, thank you very much for your time.
Thank
You're
you.
very welcome. Thanks, Emma.